Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Fred Kowal, President of United University Professions, UUP, the largest higher education union in America with over 42,000 members and nearly 8,000 retired members. I'm also chair of the board of directors of the National Wildlife Federation, the largest and most effective conservation organization in the nation. I'd like to thank both UUP and NWF for sponsoring today's panel. We're here to discuss the challenges faced by our nation and world, given the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and what the role of the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry can and should have in the face of these crises. For informational purposes, ESF is one of the 64 campuses in the SUNY system, the largest public higher education system in the nation. In a political climate that is increasingly skeptical of science, public higher education, and environmental protection, institutions like ESF are not just campuses. They are engines of applied research. They are training grounds for the next generation of environmental leaders. They are essential to advancing climate solutions and protecting biodiversity at a moment of national and indeed international consequence. And graduates of ESF become crucial stewards of public lands, which hopefully we all treasure as unique places where Americans can come together to enjoy and draw sustenance from. To help us explore these multiple themes, we're fortunate to be joined today by 5 distinguished experts whose work spans research, policy, education, and environmental leadership. I'm going to begin today's program with an overarching question that frames today's discussion. I'll ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves, who they are, what they do, and how their work connects to ESF's mission, and then to respond to the opening question, which is as follows. What state, national, or global trends do you think most challenge or most motivate your work or studies right now? We're going to begin with Collin O'Mara, who is President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Wildlife Federation. Welcome, Collin, and please unmute your microphone and go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Fred, and thanks everybody for being on today. And when Fred was sharing some of the challenges facing ESF, I was really excited to join because for those of you that don't know, I actually grew up about 10 minutes away from ESF down the hill in Syracuse. I'm a townie, and I had a chance to attend ESF classes when I was in high school. I had a chance to when I was a fellow at the Maxwell School later in my career. Obviously, did a lot of work with the school, and look, I mean, it is by far the absolute best public environmental and education school in the country. And for me, right now. What we're seeing is just kind of this kind of attack on science as a way not to confront the realities that we're experiencing in our day-to-day lives. And so that may be, trying to downplay the importance of climate science as a way to not make the investments we need to make in the transition to clean energy, the investments in resilience, the investments in making sure that communities are safer and more secure. It's a way to shift, resources to other priorities that seem to be kind of emerging in the national debate. And we're going to be in the midst of a fairly large debate over the next few weeks over additional funding for conflicts overseas and drawing potentially from resources at home to do that. And so we at the federal level, I mean, we see this trickle down all the time. And I think one of the things that gives me hope that I'm sure we'll talk about today is that at the federal level, a lot of the most draconian cuts that are being proposed by the Trump administration, by DOGE, by OMB, actually weren't supported by Congress. There's still a lot of places where Congress kind of pushed back. We got to make sure that's happening at the state level too. But for me, there is no better, more important institution or no more important place to kind of explore the solutions of the future, that applied resource that can get into the field today, build those stewards of tomorrow, than a place like the ESF. So to not invest in a place like ESF at now of all times is literally the definition of insanity.
Thanks very much, Collin. Now, I would like to turn to Robin Wall-Kimmerer, and I was going to give your full titles, but you can go ahead and do that for yourself, Dr. Kimmerer.
There we go. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being part of this panel and part of support for ESF. My name is Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I am an Emeritus SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor at ESF, where, gosh, I have served our students and community for more than 3 decades. I'm a plant ecologist and the founder of SUNY ESF's unique Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, which has become one of the nation's leading programs that engages both Western environmental sciences and Indigenous knowledge in research and education for sustainability. ESF is the kind of place which embraces these innovative, integrative approaches. I should also say, I'm also a writer with a commitment to science storytelling, which extends the understanding of both environmental threats and, importantly, environmental solutions to the public. I'm the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, which takes me all over the country. And everywhere I go, I'm going to echo what Collin said. People really praise, laud, recognize ESF all over the world for our leadership in conservation and sustainability sciences. And I couldn't be prouder than to represent ESF. It also feels important in this gathering to say by way of introduction that I'm also a mother and I'm a grandmother and a member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation. And I tell you that because my work, like that of my respected colleagues at ESF, is more than a professional career, as I think is probably true for all of us on this panel. It's a calling. ESF is populated by people with a calling and a passion for this deep dedication to understanding and protecting the natural world. It should also be noted that I am an ESF alum, and my educational start in my career happened at ESF, which really prepared me superbly and motivated me for a lifetime of environmental leadership. And when I think about the challenges and the motivations, I'm glad you put those together, Fred, because they often overlap. The heart of my work is in restoration ecology. I work in the realm of both healing land and, importantly, healing our relationship to land. So I am just driven by this question of, in this time of crisis, what does the earth ask of us in return for everything that the land provides for us? So what motivates me most is the urgency, the need to repair the ecological damage that we have done. We have not only to protect our beautiful homelands, but to restore the damage that we've done, to bring back plant communities that have been threatened by habitat loss, to use science to serve land and culture. Now, with that motivation in mind, there are a lot of trends, as you say, that challenge our work. Many have been named already. The anti-science movement, abandonment of climate action, assaults on biodiversity. I would add to that hostility toward cultural diversity and environmental justice that all adds up to almost an anti-nature stance. When I think about my own work, practically everything that I do has been labeled improper ideology. And, I take some pride in that, quite honestly. We're all too well aware of these trends. So I want to focus on another kind of challenge that I've observed as I travel the country giving lectures. And it's a challenge which also is the opportunity and the essential role for ESF. What I experience in my readers and my listeners is this paradox of a public which cares deeply for the natural world, but which is countered by public policy, which is accelerating the rate of destruction. And so the problems we face, importantly, lie at this intersection of science, of nature, and of culture. And this profound disconnect between a public which values nature for human health and well-being, for thriving ecosystems, and the current political climate, which is actively destroying those things. And bridging that gap between the current reality and creating the world that we want to live in has always been the realm of education. It has been the role of universities. And as a scientist, as an educator, as an ESF professor, I know that ESF is the place that bridges that gap between environmental values and application for problem solving. We are an institution driven by values and coupled to science. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Robin. Next up, I would like to introduce to you all Rita Hite, who's the president and CEO of the American Forest Foundation. Rita, if you can unmute your mic, please go ahead.
Thank you, Fred. A pleasure to be with all of you. And I'll just say right off the bat, loved my ESF experience. I am also an alum, 2001. So thank you, ESF. And I just want to emphasize the main point about ESF and its practical nature. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So a little bit about me. I grew up in the Albany area. My family still has a farm in upstate New York, and that's what actually brought me to the environmental field, is me wanting to understand how we can live with the land and also benefit from the land. Again, having grown up on a beef cattle farm, and realizing that the balance was off, to Dr. Kimmerer's point. So that's what brought me to ESF. And what has led me to the career that I'm in, and a little bit about the American Forest Foundation. We are a nonprofit conservation organization. We partner with America's 21 million family forest owners. So these are private landowners who own 39% of the nation's forests. And what do we do at AFF? We help those landowners make the planet better while helping them achieve their goals as well. So it's a true partnership with people and planet. The work that we do at AFF. And my ESF experience really prepared me for that, both from a science perspective, but also the application, right? How do we take this work that the science, the work that we learned at ESF, and actually apply it to real world situations to actually do the work on the ground to conserve our forests. For the American Forest Foundation, and Fred, to get to your question around kind of what motivates and challenges our work, I too kind of cross those two together, because I tend to, whatever challenges me tends to motivate me in our organization. So we focus on improving the health and productivity of family forests, right? For climate solutions and the range of benefits that our forests provide us. So to Dr. Kimmerer's point, also how do we give back so that land continues to sustain us as a population, as a planet. But to do this, it costs money, right? And the conversation we're having here is, the government support for science and public education is declining. We're also seeing government supports at least maintain, but they're not growing for the kind of practical on-the-ground application of that science through conservation practices. And so even while we need to sustain that government funding, our job at AFF has been, how do we sustain that while also growing private sector resources that are essential to support the kind of conservation work that we need to do on the ground? And for us at AFF, we took a step back a few years ago and realized that there's 1 billion tons of climate mitigation potential in family forests in the US alone. And again, these are small acreage forest owners. My mom in upstate New York has 250 acres. 50 of it is forests and the rest is farm. So that's the kind of land base that we're talking about here. There's 1 billion tons of potential. It costs money to unlock that potential. And government is not going to solve that problem for us right now. Maybe in the future we'll be able to increase government dollars, but that's not going to solve it for us right now. So I put on my practical hat and say, okay, how else can we solve this? And for us, it's about markets. It's about, yes, traditional forest products markets are important. Obviously, doing traditional forest products well and with conservation in mind is important. And what we are seeing, to the point around, humans are increasingly putting value on nature. And what we're seeing in the private sector is an increasing understanding that nature is critical to our way of life and to our businesses. And when we don't care for nature, it's actually interfering with our businesses and with our success on the ground, with our supply chains, et cetera. So we're seeing a really important trend with emerging markets, such as carbon markets, that are saying we actually are placing value not just on the product that we are harvesting from the land, but we're placing value on the environmental benefits that we're all sustaining from that land. And so we pay a lot of attention to market trends. But what is really important, and this goes back to ESF and the important work that ESF does on the science side, for environmental markets to work, you have to have the science behind it, right? You have to have the fundamentals of quality science that says, if we do this thing in our forests, we know that it's going to produce this outcome, and therefore it can be financed with the private sector dollars. And so that science is critical to unlocking new revenue streams where people are valuing nature, where corporations are valuing nature, even outside of a policy landscape that's not. We are seeing that trend, but we need that critical science to unlock private finance to actually invest in the kind of conservation outcomes that all of us have hoped and dreamed of for years and years and know are possible from our lands. So that's a little bit about how we connect to ESF. And I too just want to say how important both my educational experience was at ESF, but also the ongoing partnership that I have with so many at ESF that help us figure out what are the practical science attributes of the work that we can do, that we can apply on the ground to the nation's family forests.
Great. Thanks very much, Rita. Next up, we have Rick Fedrizzi. And Rick, like Robin, you've got a lot of titles. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself as with the other panelists. And go. You're already unmuted, so go right ahead.
Sure, Fred. Thank you. And thank you, UUP, for putting this great group together. I am Rick Fedrizzi. I am the current executive chairman of the International Well Building Institute. I'm also on the board of trustees at SUNY ESF, and it's something I'm very excited about and love every minute of. I started my career, I'm a lifetime resident of Syracuse, New York, started my career at Carrier Corporation, part of United Technologies. I was there for 25 years. And during my last 7 years with the company, I met another gentleman and I co-founded the U.S. Green Building Council. And other than the USGBC, you might know the term LEED, L-E-E-D, which is a certification system for real estate. And that was the tool that we developed in order to help transform the real estate market, which we felt was the single largest detrimental culprit in what we were seeing relative to the environment. And we thought we could do something specifically through that. I love your question, Fred, because when you talk about challenges and motivation, I mean, we live in a time right now where the signals are definitely mixed. So what challenges and what motivations we have, sometimes it's all over the place. But what really motivates me is seeing how when left to our own devices and understanding the science and understanding the challenges, certainly in the real estate business, which I've got a background in, and when you start to see that market transformation is in fact possible when you educate people as to not only the risk and what's in front of us, but also the reward. What great opportunities are there? Not only, and it should, we should think mostly in terms of energy, water, waste, materials, toxins, from the safety and the health standpoint of all those things. But by doing the right things, corporations and building owners and developers, they also have a tremendous advantage and building buildings that are in higher demand that are worth more on opening day than they would have been if they were built in a conventional fashion. They attract greater talent and they retain greater talent over the long haul. There's so many benefits to the way buildings are built and designed. Lead, I was CEO of USGBC for 15 years. I left in 2016 and went over to IWBI and helped to build that organization. USGBC and LEED right now have over 19 billion square feet of certified LEED space globally. WELL is about 6 or 7 billion at this point and growing very quickly. So you understand very quickly that LEED is about planetary health, and WELL, the certification tool, is about human health. And the idea that those two systems are intrinsically linked is why we know that we have a great solution in front of us if public policy and all of the things that are in front of us right now can get out of the way. And let us get back to the idea where science is what matters, that it drives great decisions, that it will be the fuel for the future. And certainly when you start looking at, we have now 25 years of important data on energy, water, waste, materials, everything there. We now live in a world, I hear a lot of people very worried about AI, and probably under certain circumstances we should be. I'm motivated and excited about the future of AI because we finally will have a tool that can collapse just immense amounts of data into sets that can help us make even better decisions, even faster, and do greater good, I think, in the short term. So I'm really excited to be here today with the panel and look forward to talking with all of you further.
Great. Thank you very much, Rick. And last, but certainly not least, there's a part of me that thinks we should have led off with our fifth panelist. That panelist is Dan Vera. Dan is an ESF student, and he is the president of the Mighty Oak Student Assembly. Dan, you're already unmuted, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you everybody for participating in this very important conversation where we're not only discussing the future of our college, but the future of our planet, really. But yeah, I mean, to answer that question, how am I connected to ESF? I'm a current student here at ESF. I serve as student president, student trustee, and I've had a deep connection to this college, ever since I arrived here. My journey with ESF, I came from Ecuador originally and moved to the US when I was 11 years old. And, always been attracted to nature, always been connected to nature. It's always been a very important part of my life. And I always knew that I wanted to do something in the natural world, whether it was through marine biology or through the policy world. But that's how I discovered ESF. And I knew that that is the place that I wanted to go because that's where all these professionals are, where all these like-minded people can come together to make some real impact. So it's my honor to be here, talking about the importance of ESF. I think one of the biggest, let's say, issues right now in the world that we're facing is a loss of hope. And that comes with loss of hope in environmental progress, loss of hope in social progress. And I think while it is true, there are definitely a lot of burdens, a lot of barriers right now that we are going to overcome. There is hope, and that starts in places like this in ESF, where we have the educators that are educating the next generation to become those decision makers, where we have the research that's going to be key to that restoration that Dr. Kimmerer was talking about, to all this process that is going to leave us in a better place. So I do think that's an issue. I do think people, may be losing their hopes, but that's why we need to invest in places like ESF. So we're able to build on that and educate the generations of the future. So thank you again for having me, and I'm excited for this conversation.
Great. Thanks very much, Dan. And thanks to all of you for kicking us off so very well. A couple of housekeeping things for those who are viewing. If you have a question that you would like to pose, you can put it into the chat. We will try to get to some of those questions, but realize that as of now, we've got an hour left. And we do have some questions already prepared for the panel. And they go from, basically the broad national perspective, and then much more focused on the ESF situation. And then to the panelists, so that we can try to get through as many questions as possible, please try to keep your responses to around 3 minutes to the greatest extent possible. That would be great. And the way I'm going to operate this, because I want to make sure you have the ability and you have the freedom of choice as to what questions you want to respond to and how much you want to say on those. Simply raise your hand if you want to kick things off. I'll pose the question. Whoever wants to go first, this way I won't voluntold anyone or voluntel someone to answer the question. So the first one delves it a little deeper to the theme of anti-science, or one of the themes. What are the real world consequences when science is sidelined, particularly for climate resilience, biodiversity, and environmental justice? Who would like to jump on that first? And you can simply unmute and go ahead. And don't be shy.
I'm happy to jump in first and talk
Thanks,
about
Rita.
it from my experience working with family forest owners. So today, and there's a lot of conversation here around, like, do people still value nature, and our political environment doesn't necessarily reflect that. Well, what I can say from my experience working on the ground with family landowners is they are feeling, even just over the last few years, a marked difference in their environment and the climate impacts on their forests. And so talking to a landowner a few years ago, they might have looked at me funny and said, what the heck is climate change? And today they're coming to me and saying, I'm seeing these real world impacts on my land. And so from our perspective, not having the ability to say, what do we do about that? How do we sustain these landscapes? How do we improve resilience of these landscapes? How do I look families in the eye who maybe are 5th and 6th generation landowners who don't know what to do about the future of their forest that they have put their blood, sweat, and tears into because of the impacts that climate change is happening on their land? So for us, it's, yes, there are lots of reasons why we need to really get clear around the science and invest in that. And for us, it comes back to kind of personal attachment to the land and how do we care for that land in the long run.
Great. Thanks very much, Rita. Collin, go ahead.
I mean, I think one of the things that's heartbreaking right now with the kind of the attacks we've seen at the federal level on scientific funding and scientific integrity is that just communities are less and less prepared. And we saw this in the Hill Country in Texas, with the flash floods and the kind of inability to respond and get information out. But we're seeing it day to day in communities that are just trying to become more resilient. And the insanity of it is that even if you are skeptical on the scientific side, which I think at this point is a ludicrous position to have, but even if you are, fiscally, right, every $1 we spend on resilience is going to save you $10 in disaster response. So I mean, just as Rick was pointing out, the investments in energy efficiency and kind of water conservation, things like that have huge dividends on the built environment. Ecologically, it's equally true. And so when we're not restoring our forests, when we're not managing them well, we have more catastrophic wildfires. When we're not doing coastal resilience, we're not building out those wetland systems and those dune systems, we have more impacts from hurricanes. And it's nationwide. And so it's one of these kind of an ounce of prevention kind of scenarios, but there's an insanity right now. And when you're thinking about it from a climate perspective or a biodiversity perspective, not having the science to do kind of good species recovery. And if I mean, obviously we care about species recovery for the intrinsic value of nature, but also just from a regulatory standpoint, on having more species on the endangered species list isn't good for permitting predictability. And so, and then environmental justice, kind of challenges facing communities. Those communities are always hit first and worst, when it comes to not having the investments to, have locally driven decisions that are making communities more resilient. So, when we don't build that infrastructure in smart ways, when we don't, protect communities, we all pay for it. And we're also going to pay for it, not just collectively through, kind of higher taxes and disaster supplementals. We're already seeing it in higher insurance premiums. We're seeing it in higher utility bills. We're seeing it in higher healthcare costs. I mean, we're paying and paying and paying because we're not making these very basic decisions based on sound science that can both improve our health and reduce costs at the same time.
Great. Thanks, Collin. Any other members of the panel want to weigh in on this? Just go ahead and unmute and
yeah, just very quickly, Fred, when I think about, ignoring the science, relative to buildings. I mean, I think back to the 1970s when sick building syndrome became a thing. It didn't just have a interesting acronym; it killed people, and it was just a response to the idea that by creating an energy efficient envelope that was so tight and ignoring the idea that air quality and thermal comfort and clean water, that all of these elements end up affecting people in a positive or negative way, that is one of the best examples I can give for that. But when you relate that a little bit further, sick building syndrome, yeah, people died in those buildings. But there's also another way of looking at this. When you talk about buildings that are designed improperly and that don't have the right amount of air or clean air or non-toxic materials or proper lighting and so forth, think about it. Think about a college environment where students and their test scores suffer. Think about a hospital opportunity where people trying to heal after a major surgery are not able to heal as properly or as quickly as they should. There are so many elements related to human productivity that are a part of any organization or any government that chooses to ignore the science that's in front of us. And we've got so many horrible examples today of people making pronouncements that are absolutely untrue, that try to undo 100 years of positive scientific movement in the right direction. And ultimately, I think it's our job and the job of our students to band together and to move forward and make sure that we don't forget where we are and where we need to go.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Robin or Dan, did you want to weigh in on this one? Nope. Okay. All right. I want to, and it's related to a question that showed up in our development of the program, and I would phrase it this way. I'm kind of combining a couple questions, and I do this all the time. Given what we've just discussed about the attacks on science and the real world impacts that can have, the question I have is, how does that kind of anti-science environment impact specifically an institution like ESF that has a pretty narrow, though important, and I don't mean to denigrate the mission by defining it as narrow. Perhaps a better word is focused mission like ESF. How does this anti-science atmosphere impact ESF, and then how does ESF respond to it in a fashion so that that this institution can be an important element in turning back this anti-science environment, no pun intended, that exists today. So it's kind of this two-part question of one, what does the anti-science atmosphere have? What is the impact that it has on an institution like ESF? And then second, how can ESF respond to it and perhaps change the nature of the conversation in a positive direction? And again, feel free, whoever wants to go first, just unmute.
I mean, from a student perspective, it causes a lot of fear, right? When you're looking to plan your career, when you're thinking of the future, you may be scared of going into an environmental field because of all this anti-science rhetoric. But that's why it's important for ESF to champion that, right? Things are not going to always be this way. There is a path forward. So in terms, ESF's already doing the work. We're already doing the research. We already have that impact in the world. And I think it's just a matter of continuing to do that forward and continuing to champion ourselves as this leader in environmentalism, because there is that fear. But again, just showing that there is a path forward, I think, is key to attract more students into the environmental and science field.
Dan, I want to do a quick follow-up. Do you, because you have obviously a really important role, you're close with your colleagues, your fellow students at ESF, otherwise you wouldn't be in the role that you're in. When you mention fear, is that generally noticeable among your colleagues? And how do you all find the balance between having a very, I'll use the term rational fear, while at the same time maintaining hope? How are you all doing?
I mean, I think there's just an overall uncertainty, with getting a job after college. I mean, that's just a general fear. I would say that is among all college students, especially for us. I mean, as environmental majors, we see, the EPA getting cut and all these programs, and that's just kind of the reality that we're dealing with. But I think ESF students are resilient. We're strong. I mean, we don't, we don't let that dissuade us from continuing the work. So while yes, I talk with peers, they are concerned. We joke, we find humor in the situation. We're still strong and resilient to what's happening. So I think that's how we're feeling here.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it, Dan. Robin, please go ahead.
Yeah, Dan, thanks for those insights. I see that in students too, this sense of, in the presence of these threats, this incredible not only resilience but resistance to say, no, this work needs to be done. It's that mission-driven sense again, isn't it? That we're going to prepare ourselves for both resistance and resilience. And some of that resilience occurs in the face, as you were asking, Fred, what are the real world consequences? Federal budget cuts affects all of our research. It reflects fellowship and scholarship availability for our students. So creates this discouragement for students to participate in environmental education. And yet, look at our enrollments, reflecting what Rita was suggesting. People are really connected to and value nature. And so despite these barriers, our student recruitment is really, really strong. One of the consequences of the lack of investment, I think, is reflected in our ability to respond to these crises, because as a specialized institution, we are one of the few universities in the country that is still dedicated to conservation science. The ologies that support this work, the natural history, the field experience, lab experience, undergraduate research that builds this toolkit for our students to go out and become very quickly environmental leaders in their field. In order to address questions of, I saw some in the chat of how will we address recovery after this accelerating damage. It is those conservation sciences that ESF really excels at that will give us that resilience to build back both institutions, which is going to have to be done, and to do the work of actively healing and protecting land.
Thanks very much.
Can I just
go ahead.
Just jump in and add to what Dr. Kimmerer and Dan also shared? First of all, just want to say very much can relate to the feelings of fear and discouragement, and Dan, to your point around, what's my career path going to look like? I'll just name, by the way, that I think at AFF we'll probably have about 10 open positions in the next period of time. So just if there are students looking for jobs, I'll just say our organization, and I'm sure Collin can speak to this too, has been on a similar journey over the last year, right? Are we actually going to see federal funding continue to support our work of conservation? We went through a whole series of ups and downs on grants and what was cut and what wasn't cut and all of those things. And it was really hard to maintain resilience in that. It was really hard to still keep doing the work. And so just I can very much relate to that. There were times when I wanted to curl up on the floor and cry. And the team of people around me, which includes some other ESF grads, but others from other schools as well, we kept going. And frankly, I learned a lot about leadership at ESF to help me keep going. The other thing I just want to speak to is some hope. So when I graduated from ESF, going into the environmental field was like, what the heck are you doing? It was kind of like, are you really going to have a career here, Rita? Like, what is this thing, right? I would say today, what I see in my 25 years of career path is today the value that people are placing on nature and conservation and stewardship is very, very different than what it was 20 years ago. And yes, we are in a political moment right now. And I don't see that value changing because of what people see and the impacts that nature or lack of caring for nature has on our lives. So the change from 25 years ago when people were like, what the heck is this forest thing, to today, the corporations that are investing in nature and in forests, they're doing it quietly, right? They're doing it, there's kind of a green hushing that's happening right now, but there are still private sector entities who are saying, regardless of what's happening with the government, we think this work is important. This directly impacts our businesses and our communities and the people that we serve as corporations, as institutions. And so we're going to keep going. So I just want you all to hear that, yes, there is a government dynamic here that is not healthy for us. And there is huge, I see, hope and opportunity as the private sector is stepping up. Again, they're not doing it loudly, but it is still very much happening. I think, Rick, you've seen this in your career as well. So just wanted to name that and give folks a little bit of hope as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Rita.
Can I just, Fred, Rita, thank you for saying that, because that's exactly what we did see. And when I was at U.S. Green Building Council during Bush 2 cycle, there was also kind of certainly not what we have today, but it was a denial of science, and it was, the climate issue is not important. We don't need to do this. And ultimately we saw our membership and people that were interested in supporting the movement grow really exponentially. And I think even today, U.S. Green Building Council and the work at IWBI, we're starting to see that same thing, where people start to understand that government's not going to do it for you. Certainly not after EPA has 2,500 people, kicked out of the building, and we walk away from 66 global international bodies that we've been instrumental in supporting. But people are taking it upon themselves in a really important way. And I actually, like you, I have optimism in that. I feel like, left to our own devices, people will do the right thing, and that we will get back to doing the right thing. But you do have to ride out the storm in whatever way you can.
Great. Thanks, Rick.